Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And before we get started this week, I just need to be serious and a bit somber for a moment here. This has been a tough week for me. I found out on Tuesday that my coworker, my friend, Robert J. Sloan, passed away suddenly Tuesday morning. And it's just hit me really hard. We shared an office together at work for 12 years and sat 4 feet away from each other for 4 years, and we didn't even really call each other by our names. It was always office mate. Hello, office mate. Good morning, office mate. Office mate, can you help me with this? So we just had this relationship where we were very close and shared things, and he helped me through some really rough times, and hopefully I was there for him through some really rough times. And he was just a larger than life presence. Everybody knew him. To know him, to meet him was to know him. I said that the other day. To meet him was to know him. He just was who he was. Uh, an extrovert to the nth degree, always willing to put himself aside to help others. And where we work, child protection, CPS, that is much needed. And he always went above and beyond. And he was a good friend and a coworker and my office mate. And it's just been a rough week losing him, and now realizing I will never see him again. Again, sat 4 feet away from me. We've been in the same office together for 12 years. And this one's for you, office mate. Rest in peace. And thank you guys for indulging me. Let us get on to the strange and spooky stuff now. Okay, so this week I'm going to be talking about the ghosts of Fort Mifflin, which is on the south side of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Fort Mifflin is famously haunted, I would say. They would say that they're the most haunted place in Pennsylvania, if not the country, if not the world, but so many places will say that we are the most haunted. We have the best ghost stories. And I bring this up, and I'm doing this episode mainly because last weekend, Rebecca and I, the lovely Rebecca, and I went to the Philly Renaissance Fair there at Fort Mifflin. And it was really cool. A lot of cool acts that we had seen, and I'll tag some of them below so you guys can check them out. But really cool little Ren Fair. Very small, no joust, no, just small number of vendors, but it was a nice day out. It was beautiful weather. And it just reminded me that I'd been to Fort Mifflin before, back in 2010 with my original ghost hunting group. We had gone there on a field trip, sort of an exploratory trip to kind of talk to people there, see if we could book an investigation. And it was a nice trip. It sadly, I'm not going to go into the drama of it, but it ultimately ended that particular group. And then we started another group, minus a particular member. But even at the time, we went to Fort Mifflin, and I'm trying to remember, but I think even back then in like 2010, so you're going back like 15 years, it was like $800 to investigate for like 6 hours. And I forget how much it was overnight. And now it's still in that similar range. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But I have my issues with this, and we'll get into this. I don't want to turn this into a knocking Fort Mifflin or knocking ghost hunting thing, but there are reasons why I don't go ghost hunting anymore. So let's look at the Fort Mifflin site, and I'll get into that. All right. So first of all, and these things are going to become important. Here's Philadelphia, and you have the Delaware River here, and Fort Mifflin just sits right down here, and you can see it's an old Revolutionary War fort, and pre-Revolutionary War actually, and it's got kind of that star shape, and it's right on the river. Very cool. There's still some buildings standing. There's some casements and some magazines. But if you zoom out, you can see there's something right to the west of it, and it is Philly International Airport. So lots of planes flying right overhead, and you're seeing the video now of planes really low overhead. And that was one of the reasons why we felt it would be very difficult to investigate there. Just we knew there were a ton of stories. It was supposed to be haunted. I know they were on Ghost Hunters and a lot of the other popular TV shows back in the day. And that's kind of why they were charging exorbitant rates to investigate there. But for us, it was like, we're going to travel an hour and a half, pay almost $1,000. I mean, just $800 to the fort alone, if not more, for a complete overnight. And then tapes and battery. I mean, back then, things weren't as digital as they are now. So tapes for the camcorders and batteries for the flashlights and camcorders and gas and food. And like we're looking at over $1,000. And we were a small group. We always kept it to like 4 to 6 people. We never wanted like big groups because then you have contamination, you have less control, and a scientific examination and investigation should be about scientific controls. You need to control the environment as best you can. And we just felt we weren't going to get that there, especially at that money. And then you have planes going overhead every 2 to 3 minutes, very low flying, big planes. These aren't little tiny little private jets or prop, planes. So let's look at the Fort Mifflin website today. So they have their list of paranormal programs and events. And like I said, my memory wasn't great, so I couldn't really remember. The number that stuck out in my head was $800. They're now charging for a 6-hour investigation. It is $900 for up to 10 people, which again, I feel like is a lot of people. An additional $75 per person for groups of 11 or more. And there is an overnight, so you can do this from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m., which is a good amount of time. And that's usually what we would do to investigate if we did a local business or a private home. And the cost for that is $1,500 for up to 10 participants. So that's a lot of money for, it's $150 a person to go in and investigate. And they have some other open investigation evenings. They charge for all of this. And I'm trying to walk a fine line here. I love supporting history. I want to support history. I understand that they need to charge because otherwise they would just be inundated with groups wanting to investigate. Like even when we were doing this back in 2010, there wasn't this surge of groups like you kind of have, not so much now, but even just a couple of years ago, you just had everybody and their brother wanted to be in a paranormal group. And a lot of them would trespass. A lot of them would not take it seriously. And they would bring pizza and beer and 20 people. And that's not really a good paranormal investigation. And I understand why they got to charge this money. They want to make sure that you're serious. They want to make sure that they're covered. If you break something, if you damage the property, they've got $1,500 of yours, so they can throw that to that. So I do get it. Like I said, I'm kind of torn here. I understand where Fort Mifflin is coming from. On the other hand, I just think that is really expensive to charge people to come in and investigate when they're giving up their time and their resources to do it. So I don't know. Like I said, I could see both sides here. For us, it just didn't work out. We just didn't have the money. We didn't think it was worth it. Like I said, with the planes overhead, we just felt too much noise contamination, too much of a distraction that these planes, some of them are very low and they're loud and you can be startled by these planes coming in. And to pay that amount of money to have this distraction every 2 to 3 minutes as planes are coming in and taking off, it was just too much for us. It's a great location. Love it there. It's beautiful. I highly suggest going there if you're into history. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but it was a Revolutionary War fort. It saw action in the War of 1812 during the Civil War. It served its purpose during World Wars I and II. Didn't see action, obviously, but it served its purpose. So a very cool place to visit. I can't be on board with $1,500 for an overnight. That is a lot of money. We've been to other places where we've had to pay like $200 or $400. And that was really, they told us to cover the cost of, keeping security guards there overnight, which we understood. You got to keep 2 or 3 guys there for an extra 12 hours. Fine. He'll pay the $400. $1,500, that's a lot of money. So, but yeah, go support the fort. I am totally behind supporting history and museums and all that good stuff. And I do like that they embrace the paranormal. I wish they wouldn't profit from it so much. Again, lower your prices, guys, a little bit. Just let those ghost hunting groups get in there. Okay, so most of my information tonight is coming from Ghost City Tours and another paranormal group. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to kind of give back because I do appreciate ghost hunting groups and ghost tour groups that embrace the history and really provide that back. Even the Fort Mifflin site, they don't really go into a lot of the paranormal history. They're taking your money, but there's not a lot of ghost stories on their site, which again, I can kind of understand. They offer the paranormal stuff, but they want to focus on the actual history and not, the faceless ghost or the screaming lady. Um, so as I said, Fort Mifflin was constructed in 1772 by the British. They wanted to protect Philadelphia. And then when the Revolutionary War started, the Americans claimed the fort and completed the construction. So soldiers here fought off the British. And then in, I believe it was 1777, British soldiers overtook the fort. So 250 men, that was about 70% of the crew that were there, were killed or wounded. The fleeing survivors, they set the fort on fire and escaped. So, and then much of the fort was dismantled when the British took control. It was rebuilt in 1798 from orders from President John Adams. So, a nice bit of history. We have some forts here on, we have a fort here on Staten Island. We have a fort over in Bay Ridge on the other side of Fort Wadsworth, Fort Hamilton. So I love history. I love that history. In the Civil War, 1863, it was used as a military prison. So a lot of times you'd have these prisoner exchanges, you'd have POWs, and it was used as a POW camp, basically. Throughout the war, 56,000 prisoners died due to unsanitary conditions in these prisons. So really disturbing. It says here too, 45 prisoners were jammed into a cell that was about 50 by 80 feet. So very small amount of space to have 45 men. So really crazy. I'm not going to get too deep into the history here. It's all online. I'm going to link to these below. You guys are here for the ghost stories, not history. And there are far better people out there to talk about history lessons. As much as I love the Civil War, I'm kind of getting into the Revolutionary War now too. I'm more of a Civil War guy, and Gettysburg, like that's really my jam. But I'm really getting more into the Revolutionary War stuff. We're watching Turn, Washington Spies, and all that cool stuff. So yeah, if you want to learn more of the history, I was just trying to give a brief overview here, and we'll get more into that into the actual ghost stories. But like I said, I will link to all of this down below. So the main ghost story I want to talk about tonight is the legend of the Faceless Man, and this is still on Ghost City Tours, and they have a really good write-up here, so I'm going to kind of read from this. And it basically says that the most infamous ghost or famous ghost of Fort Mifflin is the Faceless Man, and visitors spot his apparition roaming through the property in Civil War attire. So not the Revolutionary War stuff, even though like 250 guys died there, they're seeing a Civil War soldier ghost or apparition. Most people believe the spirit belongs to a man named William H. Howe, and he was notoriously executed at the fort during the Civil War for desertion. So a lot of the stories paint him as this treacherous, murdering outlaw, deserter. He's supposed to be an evil spirit, evil force, and again, a lot of ghost hunting groups or tours they need to kind of zhuzh these things up and make them more interesting than they are. And we see this a lot in Gettysburg, and it really drives me nuts where you see these ghost tours just making up stories of things that never happened. If you actually talk to a real historian or a battlefield guide, they'll tell you like, no, that never happened. But the ghost tours have to kind of outdo each other because there's a whole bunch of them there, and I think this happens with most haunted locations, is just that they each have to outperform the other and outdo each other, and you just get these fantastical stories. So here's the true story of the Faceless Man, William Howe. According to historical documents, he was a 25-year-old German farmer who joined the Union Army. He was known as a great marksman, won accolades for his bravery at Fredericksburg, and he wanted to stay on the battlefield like day and night. His friends were impressed with his personal courage and indomitable will. So I guess during the course of the war, he came down with a, quote, attack of inflammation of the bowels, nowadays called dysentery. The disease was the number one killer of Civil War soldiers. There's just very unsanitary conditions. You think about it, these guys are marching, they're sweating, they're outdoors, there's no bathrooms, there's no way to clean up. It caused uncontrollable bloody diarrhea. So you're not just getting dehydrated, you're bleeding. Really terrible way to go. So he didn't want to leave his men. He didn't want to leave the battle. He saw a doctor. He went home to recover, stayed in bed for like 2 months, and he wasn't able to report back to his unit. Again, in those days, there's no text messaging. There's no easy way to communicate that, hey, I'm sick and I'm not going to be there today. Like today, you send a text message to your boss and you're not in today. So this is where he kind of gets into trouble. So his enrolling officer came looking for him. The officer and 3 other men showed up at his house drunk at midnight to fetch him. Again, you don't have the the protocols and standards that we have today, which are a little bit more understanding. Back then, it was, and this was war. If you didn't show up, you were a traitor, you're treasonous, you're a deserter, you're getting executed. So Howe picked up his gun and fired 2 shots at the rowdy crowd outside his bedroom window, trying to scare them off. He didn't realize that both of his shots directly struck his enrolling officer, fatally wounding him. So now not only is he a deserter, but he's shot an officer. So Howe was imprisoned after he was arrested, and he was taken to Eastern State Penitentiary, which is also claimed to be haunted. And then he was sentenced to death after his trial. He was granted a stay of execution as he pleaded for mercy. He actually even wrote to Abraham Lincoln for help. So the mercy never came. Today is widely believed authorities did not give Howe any leniency because they felt they needed to make an example of him. So this was a big deal in the Civil War. Like if you were a deserter, if you were a traitor, they wanted to make an example of you. There wasn't a lot of leniency for that. They could forgive a lot of things. And there are instances where, the opposite was kind of true. They just say, hey, if you promise not to go back and fight again, we'll let you go. And the guy's like, yeah, I promise. And they let him go. And of course, they return to the fight. So in his final moments, Howe made a statement to the crowd, and it goes like this: I never sought the life of the man I killed. I never wished it, and I feel God will pardon me for taking it as I did. I know my fellow soldiers and officers in the army never blamed my leaving, as I was an invalid and had no hospital to go to in my regiment. So here it seems like a case of a misunderstanding. Just he was sick. He kind of went from this guy who didn't want to leave the battlefield to now he's gone, and they're seeing him as a deserter, and they want to make an example of him. And sadly, he's trying to scare these guys off who are drunk and rowdy and trying to basically kidnap him back into the army when he's ill. And he fires a warning shot, and it kills an officer. So really bad misunderstanding here. A bag was placed over his head, which is why the apparition appears to be faceless, and his neck snapped in the gallows. So again, you have these ghost hunting groups who try to make him out as this evil guy, and he's this evil specter. And it just sounds like a tragic misunderstanding where you had this really loyal guy who just wanted to fight for his country and get back to the battlefield as quickly as possible, and just couldn't get word to his regiment that, hey, I'm in this hospital convalescing. And a tragic turn of events, these rowdy guys come take him back. He doesn't know what's going on. He fires a few shots and accidentally kills his enrollment officer. So very sad story. But again, people see this faceless apparition. They believe it to be him, just because of the bag placed over his head. Who knows? Let me know what you guys think down below. But an interesting story. William Howe, and he died tragically, and not the evil spirit that maybe he's made out to be. Okay, so we're going to talk a few more stories. This time I'm getting my information from Night Watch Paranormal. And again, like I said, I like to sort of pay it forward and give these guys a shout out, because I appreciate when ghost hunting groups focus on history and focus on facts and focus on providing information, and don't just focus on, here's our evidence, and here's 37 photos of our team, and here's our equipment. And I appreciate the historical interest by this team. So go give them a like or a subscribe, or check out their website. I'm going to link to that below. So go check them out and give them some love. So they go into detail about some other specters and ghosts haunting Fort Mifflin, and we're going to get into some of those tonight. Their entry on the Faceless Man is very short. That's why I pulled it from the other website, which you should also check out. But the first one we're going to talk about is the Screaming Woman. The Screaming Woman has sometimes been described in differing ways. Some claim the voice is old, some young, and others in between. She has been especially associated with the officers' quarters. The Philadelphia police have been called out on numerous occasions in response to her loud, blood-curdling screams. I've heard these screams at 3 a.m. on a cold February night during an investigation. I was deep in Casemate 5, checking into some odd movements and forms caught on the DVR system. The screams were so loud I had thought something horrible happened at the team's base area. We quickly realized the screams came from an area that was near the officers' quarters near a body of water. We were unable to find anyone in these areas. So I have some thoughts. The Screaming Woman has often been identified as Elizabeth Pratt. Pratt was the wife of a local officer who disowned her daughter for running away with a soldier. For falling for a soldier, for running away with a soldier. A little bit of a typo there, maybe. When the daughter contacted typhoid fever, the two never had time to reconcile before the disease took her life. After being heard to sob for a week, a distraught Pratt hung herself in the officers' quarters from the second floor balcony. However, Anthony L. Saletti of Fort Mifflin, A Paranormal History, says the true story is that Elizabeth Pratt's husband, a U.S. Army sergeant, and her infant son and daughter, Elizabeth, lived in a shack inside the fort. The son died in 1802. The daughter died in 1803 of yellow fever. Elizabeth Pratt herself died in 1803, also from yellow fever. The desperate screaming of a mother that lost 2 children in 1 year is what is heard in the fort at night. All I can say is the screams we heard that night were not the screams of someone crying. They sounded like someone was being murdered or discovered the body of a loved one broken and bleeding. There was no sobbing, just a bone-chilling, heart-stopping wall of horror. So I have thoughts on this. And usually we talk about this in Bigfoot episodes, but we often talk about these weird screams or howls that people hear, and they say it sounded like someone was being murdered. Usually a fox can sound like that. A fox's call can sound like what people describe as somebody being murdered, like a woman being murdered. Not this gentle sobbing, but this blood-curdling scream, like they're being attacked or murdered or in total shock. So it's one of these things that just makes me wonder. And it's not a total rural area here, but there's enough trees and wilderness there where, I mean, we have fox on Staten Island here, so I could see a fox running through there and maybe screaming at night. And if you're a ghost hunter and you're thinking, we got to listen for the Screaming Woman, and you hear a fox screaming or another animal, you're going to think it's the Screaming Woman. You're going to think it's this ghost. And I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying I like to explore all possibilities. It very well could be this woman screaming, but I can understand a mother crying over her lost children. But to me, that would probably sound more like that deep sobbing and not this blood curdling, I'm being murdered type of scream. I could be wrong, but interesting nonetheless. But this is one of those things we do hear a lot. So is it just people constantly hearing foxes screaming at night, or is there something more to it? Let me know what you guys think. I just thought it was interesting that they use the exact sort of language, like someone being murdered, because we hear that a lot with fox screams and bigger cat screams, mountain lions, bobcats, things like that, fishers. So you just never know. It could have been a fox just screaming. And if you're in a casemate and it's coming from outside and the acoustics are a little weird, a casemate is like this underground brick building. It's kind of like an archway. So the acoustics in there get a little weird. So this could have been a fox. It could have been a ghost. Who knows? Let me know what you guys think down below. There's another ghost called the Lamplighter. The presence known as Lamplighter has been spotted walking around carrying an oil-burning lamp, although all the lights inside and outside the fort are electric, supposedly identified as Joseph Adkins. This one's a little bit more interesting. You're seeing a light, you're seeing a lamp, a lantern, walking around the fort at night. And you'd think the fort would have good security, so you would know who was on the grounds, who wasn't. I'm guessing this had been seen prior to the ghost hunters going there and the paranormal investigators. Whether it's ghosts or Bigfoot or whatever, screams and howls usually don't impress me. That previous one sounds almost like a fox scream. This one, a little bit harder to debunk. I think if you're out there and you're seeing a weird light moving through the fort at night, that's a little creepy. So who knows what that could be. The tour guide is another ghost that is known to be at Fort Mifflin. In the area of the powder magazine, there's a very friendly spirit that enjoys interacting with the visitors of the area. He is dressed in Revolutionary War apparel, so this one goes back a little bit further. Many individuals believe that he is actually an employee and he offers detailed tours of the fort. He actually answers questions, jokes, and loves to socialize. The office states that there is no such employee that dresses in this manner or offers the same tours that this spirit offers. However, guests believe that he is quite real. And this reminds me a lot of some stories we've heard about Gettysburg, where people go there and they think they're watching a reenactment. I'm sorry, I have like new glasses. I keep adjusting them. But people go to Gettysburg, and we've heard these stories before where people say, we thought we were watching a reenactment and then people just disappeared. But they're not thinking ghosts at first. They're thinking like, oh, here's some reenactors and they're marching and they're dressed in Civil War army attire, and then they just disappear. So this story reminds me of that. And I mean, it could be just some guy dressed up like that. And we've seen some people at Gettysburg who looked like General Lee, who looked like other famous people in the war. And they weren't official guides. They were just guys who liked dressing up and talking to people on the battlefield. So it's possible that's what's going on here. But interesting that it has that sort of parallel to Gettysburg. So very interesting. Ghost ships. Apparently, there are several reports of ships docked at the fort. The ship appears to be old-time sailing vessels for the most part. We saw a ship when we were there last weekend, and it was clearly not an old-time sailing vessel. It was a modern ship. But I love ghost ships. We got to talk more about that in a future episode, because I think, like the Mary Celeste, and there's so many ghost ships out there. I think it's fascinating. So I do need to do an episode on those. Another ghost that supposedly haunts Fort Mifflin is the sad-looking man, a ghostly figure who has been spotted walking alone down the road to the fort's gate. Dubbed the sad-looking man, he disappears without a trace upon reaching the gate. So when you go into the fort, there's like this archway that you walk through, and that takes you through the initial wall, and you get into the fort proper, like inside the fort with all the buildings and the barracks and all that. So interesting. And he looks sad, I guess, and he just walks to the gate and disappears without a trace. And that's always fascinating to me when you see these people and then they just disappear. And I've talked about that on my show before. I've seen a few of those in my time. And I'm not saying they're ghosts. I'm just saying I've seen people, or what I thought was a person or people, and then they just disappear. So it could be freaky. And the last story they talk about is the blacksmith. And they say here, the former blacksmith shop is home to the ghost of an old blacksmith known only as Jacob. His ghost is sometimes seen inside the building. Jacob apparently liked to keep the doors and windows open. However, the commandant wanted them shut. Apparently, the argument continues to this day, with the doors and windows opening and shutting themselves at random. Also, the rhythmic clash of a hammer against anvil is often heard, only to stop as people come to the shop to investigate the noise. These stories have been around since before the fort was turned into a museum, so that's interesting. Some people have also claimed to interact with a person dressed in an old military uniform, so this sounds almost like the tour guide. It isn't until they ask the staff about him that they learn there is no one doing living history there. So again, this, like, people are not even thinking ghost. They're just like, oh, like, here's a reenactor, and then they disappear, or the fort says we don't employ anybody like that. So really kind of interesting. No supporting evidence has yet been uncovered of any Jacob residing at the fort, and those records can be a little sketchy. My family and I, my dad, he's been searching for years to try to find some ancestors at Fort Hamilton and other places, and family history says he was there, but the fort says no, he was never here. So you get like these weird records, and names can change and records can be lost. We all know that. Again, there was no computer system back then. You're talking 250 years ago. So very different times. But again, I think it's interesting that you have these windows and doors being shut. You hear that the hammer sounds like a residual haunting. Just he's hammering, he's making these things. And it's just echoes of the past almost, not really like an active, intelligent spirit. But we've all heard stories of that. Doors opening or shutting by themselves, windows opening and closing by themselves. And usually it's from, security staff will talk about this. They'll go and do the rounds and they close everything, and then they come back the next morning and it's all open, or vice versa. So very strange. But yeah, apparently a bunch of spirits here at the fort, and some are friendly and some may not be so friendly. It seems like the Faceless Man gets a bad rap. I'll talk about what they say here about him. And it just says real quick, some have seen a man sewing in casemate number 5, but when he looks up, his face is gone. This is thought to be William Howe, although he may have been held here for some time before the escape attempt. He is historically identified in casemate number 11. Casemate number 5 also has a spirit who seems attracted to blonde women, often touching them. And I remember when we went with my old paranormal group, we had a member of the group who had kind of blondish, dirty blonde hair. And we kind of sat in the casemate number 5, just trying to see if her hair would get played with. And nothing happened. You know, it was during the day, though. We didn't do an overnight. We were just kind of, like I said, there to case the joint, if you will, case the casemate. And nothing happened. But I do remember that specific story, that the spirit would play with a blonde woman's hair. And we had a blonde in the group, dirty blonde, but still blonde. And nothing happened. So make of that what you will. But here are the alleged ghosts of Fort Mifflin. All right, everybody. So let me know what you guys think of these ghosts. A lot of them sound very sort of stereotypical, just, you know, the faceless guy, the angry guy, the tour guide. Like I said, we hear a lot of that in Gettysburg, where people will say they think they saw a reenactment or a reenactor and then it disappears, or the officials at the park or the museum say, no, we don't employ anyone like that. So really interesting. The screams, I don't know what to make of that. Again, the skeptic in me says probably a fox or another similar animal making just these ungodly sounds. But, you know, the believer in me wants to believe that maybe there's a screaming woman at Fort Mifflin and still haunts to this day. And that's interesting to me, because maybe there are these ghosts there. And just a cool place. We loved the Ren Faire there. I don't know if we'll go back. It's very small, but the performers there were really good. Like I said, I will list them down below so you can check out their YouTubes or Instagrams and things like that. But some really cool acts there. And we had a lot of fun. Good food, good times, great weather. The planes, everybody was making jokes that, oh, the metal dragons are coming, you know, and it's fun, but it's like every 2 or 3 minutes that there's just a large plane coming in for a landing and then another one taking off in the distance. So a loud fair, a loud place to investigate. And this is why I always sort of shied away from investigating in the city itself, like in Manhattan, in apartment buildings. I just think there's too much room for contamination, too much possibility that it's a neighbor. You know, you got people upstairs, downstairs, to the left, to the right, maybe even behind you. All these apartments are connected. They're not really insulated very well for sound. So someone yelling next door could sound like a ghost yelling, or it could just sound like muffled voices. And oh my God, that's a ghost. Most people can differentiate between that. But when you have like 8 hours of video and audio to go through, times, you know, however many cameras and recording devices you have, it's a lot to go through. You can't always remember, was that the neighbors yelling, or is that a ghost that we caught on audio, you know, saying something? So you got to be real careful. And I'm not saying don't investigate Fort Mifflin. If you got the money, you got the time, and you got the patience to deal with the airplanes, go for it. We just didn't really feel it was worth it for us at the time. And like I said, I'm not trying to badmouth Fort Mifflin here. I totally understand why they do it. I think it's a little bit on the pricey side, but I do think they need to charge, just because if you have a big group in there, you might get damage. You might get the teams who want to come in and just drink beer and have pizza, and that's not cool, because this is a historic place. It should be preserved. So I get it, but just wanted to give my 2 cents. So until next time, everybody, question everything. Was that a screaming woman ghost, or was it just a fox? Was it a reenactor? Was it just somebody who likes coming into the fort and doing reenactments on his own? He may not be employed by the fort, but maybe he just likes to come in and give tours. Very possible. And just because he doesn't work there doesn't mean he's a ghost. So got to question these things. But I love Fort Mifflin. It's a cool place. Go check it out if you can. Embrace the weird, everybody. Thank you for indulging my little speech in the beginning. Rest in peace to my office mate, and rock and roll, everybody.